Sabbath, we acknowledge that we are finite. We have limited time, limited hours, limited energy, limited resources. And by embracing Sabbath, we trust God with 6 days rather than trusting ourselves with 7. Secondly, humanity is restless. In 2019, we're caught up in something that I've heard called the editorial age. 20 years ago, we were often called like the digital age. But basically the point that this person makes in calling us the editorial age instead of the digital age is that we are constantly bombarded with information. Everything is at our disposal. Anything. And it's up to us a lot of times to edit down what we are actually taking in. Versus the digital age 20 years ago where the internet was like starting to be a thing and we're like, oh my goodness, what do I have at my fingertips? Now the question is, what do I need to delete from my fingertips in order to focus on certain things? Additionally, we live in this age of instant gratification. Like this week, I was exposed to this. I have 3 young kids, and if you don't know, Disney Plus came out this week, which is like a game changer for parents. Basically, it's a Netflix that Disney put out. And what it did was it took things like shows that I saw 20 years ago, and it's like, oh, now I can expose my kids to Darkwing Duck and Recess and all of these other things that I'm like, these are the greatest cartoons, and what you watch are terrible, right? But it also made it so that like movies that were in the Disney vault, which means that you can only get it whenever they open it and release it every whatever years, are now just available for streaming. It's just this instant gratification mindset. I mean, you go through the list of things that are on there, and there's things on there, and this is true about the internet, that it's like, I never knew I needed to know this thing. But now that I've seen it on here, I guess I have to know, right? Like there's a show on Disney Plus called How Dogs Got Their Shapes. Who needs to know how dogs got their shapes? That's ridiculous. But it's on there, and certainly people will watch it because it's available to us, right? Instant gratification. We are restless. And while this day we live in even more of an exuberance of this restlessness, it's always been a reality for humanity. Sabbath is a reminder of how God once rescued Israel out of enslavement in Egypt. You can read this in the book of Exodus. And what's so astonishing is as you read it in the book of Exodus, it's not that long before the people, the Israelites who are being led out of enslavement, manual labor enslavement, decide to start complaining about their situation. They begin to become restless with where they're at. We are restless. We're always elevating our experience in the past over our present, like the Israelites. Maybe it's not that we elevate the past, but maybe we are just projecting forward with what's going to be so great in the future, and we're just restless for that next season. The grass is always greener. We are restless from the pace of life we live at, from the people we're trying to be, from the narrative about ourselves that we want everyone else to believe, from trying to control that, from working on growing and improving. We are restless, always trying to find the one, trying to keep up with parenting strategies and expectations, grieving the loss of family members and friends, living with pain and hurt and betrayal, dealing with physical ailments. We are restless. But thankfully, we have a God who provides that rest for us. It says in the book of Isaiah, the Lord gives you relief from suffering and turmoil. In the Psalms we read, in peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. In Exodus, the book where we're talking about with the Israelites, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And we read from the words of Paul in Philippians, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. We're so restless. This is why we see this as a theme throughout the scriptures, the need for our rest, the need for humanity to rest because we are restless. The famous church history father says this, Augustine of Hippo says, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord. Our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee." God is what provides us with that rest. And one of the tools he uses to do that is through Sabbath. The third thing to remember when we talk about Sabbath and humanity is that Sabbath is a resistance. It's a resistance against conventional wisdom. It's a resistance against cultural norms and expectations. It's a shift of thinking that we can just go and we can go and we can go. And instead it's stopping and saying, I'm going to trust God with one of these days without work. It's about trust. And by choosing to Sabbath, what we're ultimately doing is declaring loyalty to God, showing our allegiance to him. It's a sign of relationship. As the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, out of enslavement, one of the things that they did was separate themselves or set them apart from the other folks who were in the area, the Canaanites. We obviously know about circumcision and how that played a role in that, but there's other things as well. And one of the tools that they used to separate themselves was Sabbath. The Canaanite people had this reputation of just going and being a hardworking people, never taking a day off, which really reflected to the Israelites their enslavement in Egypt. Therefore, to resist the culture that they now found themselves in, they chose to take a day off, Sabbath, to rest. What they did was a reflection of who they were. And the same logic holds true for us. Who we are is evidenced by what we do. So if our identity is found in God, which means our actions are different than if our identity is found in the things we do or in this world or in the pace that we are trying to live at. And the reality is I think we've gotten to a point in our culture where we have elevated this idea of almost being robots. Or we have this expectations on ourselves and on other people to be kind of robots, right? To live in a way that's not human, to not slow down, but to just go and go and go and go, right? In fact, I think we've elevated this idea almost of being inhuman as being a great human. The people who are best are the people who can just keep up with the demands and the pace of life, right? Maya Angelou once said this that I thought was very challenging to me, and I'm sure it will be to you as well. Every person needs to take one day away, a day in which one consciously separates the past from the future. Jobs, family, employers, and friends can exist one day without any one of us. If our egos permit us to confess, they could even exist eternally in our absence. Each person deserves a day away in which no problems are confronted, no solutions are searched for. Each one of us needs to withdraw from the cares which will not withdraw from us. And the hard part about taking that so seriously is that it's counter to our society, and it forces us to answer questions about who we are. It forces us to be honest with ourselves that we like people depending on us. We view that as a value. The last point here is that Sabbath is to be a rhythm. Honestly, when we think about Sabbath, I think we do it in the same way that a lot of us do something like vacation, right? We gear up and we run towards it, and we're busy and busy and busy. And the week before vacation, maybe this is just me, but I don't know. It's like an 80-hour work week because really you got to make up for those 40 hours that you're not going to be around the next week, which kind of defeats the purpose of going on a vacation, right? And so then we get on vacation, and what do? One of two things. We either collapse and it's not restful, it's not helpful at all, and we're just a grouch because we're so out of our grind and so exhausted from the grind that we can't enjoy it. Or it takes us 3 days for our bodies to even realize that we're on vacation, that we've changed our habit because our bodies are so used to keeping up and running with the pace and the craziness of life. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Sabbath being a habit helps us when we go on vacation, when we do things like that. It helps us to slow down. Like anything, it's like a muscle. It's a habit that needs built. Like working out or dieting, going to counseling, learning a new skill or a hobby. The breakthroughs are not found in a one-time experience. They're found in repetition. And with Sabbath, before you need to embrace that repetition before you experience renewal in Sabbath. When we fail to embrace this, we fail to understand even the science behind resting, right? Studies show that a day of rest, a weekly day of rest, can reduce stress, reduce the risk of heart disease, boost immune systems, help us sleep better, improve mental energy, creativity, productivity, rejuvenation, and short-term memory. And yet we still don't slow down. By failing to embrace Sabbath as a rhythm, we also neglect with how important it is biblically. Right? If you just open to the book of Exodus, which is the book that we've mentioned a few times, to Exodus 20, where there are the 10 commandments, you'll look at the 10 commandments, and there's this stark distinction between the one listed for Sabbath and a lot of the other commandments. For something like murder, it literally just says, "You shall not murder." That's it. 4 words. For Sabbath, there's 5 sentences talking through the importance. That's how important they saw it. So then why do we downplay the importance of making Sabbath a routine in our lives? So since we've laid a lot of the groundwork here, let me get a little practical. Let me give you some tidbits, some aspects that help us employ Sabbath. Not as just checking the box, not as a vegging out necessarily, but instead a purposeful break from the normal grind in our week. Here are 4 different things. They come from Pete Scazzaro, his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. He has a chapter that talks about Sabbath and rest. The first thing is to stop. What a biblical approach to Sabbath starts with stopping. Sabbath is about stopping. It's about embracing our limits. It's about resisting the need to do more. It's okay with things not being complete. Now, this looks different for every one of us in this room because we do different things. We're involved in different lines of work. We're in different life stages, right? Abraham Heschel says, "A man who works with his mind should Sabbath with his hands, and a man who works with his hands should Sabbath with his mind." Right? It looks different. In this season of life, for our family, I work full-time, and I go to school as well, in grad school, and my wife stays home with our young kids. And so Sabbath to both of us looks very, very different, right? For me, a lot of times, it's not thinking. It's slowing down. It's being present with my kids. It's being present with people. For my wife, on the other hand, it's having adult conversations. It's using her mind, because when she's chasing our kids around, when she's taking them to school, she's doing all of those things, that she can't have those same adult conversations that I'm just having. The same adult topics that I'm thinking through my work and through my schooling. For us, stopping means that we have to communicate with those around us what that is that we are stopping. We have to set that expectation that we're going to slow down, that we're going to stop, because if we don't, no one else will. No one else is going to say, "Hey, you need to stop doing this thing. You need a Sabbath." We have to set that boundary for ourselves. And oftentimes people are way more receptive to that than we realize. The second thing is the second aspect of Sabbath is rest. What is rest? Rest is things that bring you delight and replenishment. What is that brings you delight and replenishment? Here's a list of things that maybe we need to replace with rest. Think about it for yourself for just a moment. Work, hurriedness, multitasking, worrying, competitiveness, decision-making, social media, talking, school, technology. For me, I live a very, very hurried life. I block out my schedule. If you look at my schedule, it may stress you out if you're not a person like that, where it's like 3 hours of this, 2 hours of this, and it is just back to back to back to back things. And so for me, when I practice Sabbath, the most important thing that I do is be unhurried. And that's really, really, really hard. And so I put myself in situations where I'm forced to be unhurried. Right? If I go to the grocery store, I go to Target or whatever, I won't choose the quickest line or the line that's self-checkout. I'll try to choose a line that has a few more people in it to force me to slow down. I may park a little bit further away, so that way I walk a little bit further and I'm more present in the moment. I may engage in a conversation with the person that's checking me out there. If I sit down and I have a drink with a friend or a coffee with a friend, I'll actually just be there. Not with time limitations, but instead just being present. So you have to ask for yourself, what is rest? What brings you replenishment and delight? What do you need to replace with rest? The third aspect is delight. To slow down allows us to find delight in the small things. We run right past so many things that are so amazing, right? It's that concept of like slowing down to smell the flowers, right? We don't do that. What brings us delight? Well, maybe it's helpful to think through the thing that you need to get away from in order to realize the thing that brings you joy, the thing that brings you this delight. Maybe it's in this stage of your life, you have a little extra time and you want to help someone else have delight, and they're in a stage of life or season or just a life circumstance where they can't slow down and rest. And so your way of finding delight is helping them have delight and rest. Maybe it's just realizing those things that we just run right past each and every day and just realizing the beauty that we pass in creation. The amazing things in terms of even like how our senses work and realizing that, being thankful for that. The fourth aspect is to contemplate. Historically, worshiping God has always been a part of Sabbath. But again, this looks different for each one of us. For those of us who are maybe doing a lot of reading, we're entrepreneurs, we're doing a lot of work with our minds, maybe what you need to do is get outside. Get outside and see God through your senses. See him through creation. Maybe for those of us who do a lot of work with your hands, maybe for you it's cracking open a book. It's having a conversation, thinking through different concepts, different things in a dialogue. Shelley Miller says, rest provides fine-tuning for hearing God's messages amidst the static of life. So if you feel like you can't hear God, maybe you need to check whether or not you're slowing down and resting. There's a couple in our church named Noah and Carrie Bennett, who I've asked them if I could share this. I'm not just using this by myself. But about a year ago, they started this journey to try to incorporate Sabbath into their lives. We sat through emotionally healthy spirituality over a year ago, and Carrie was talking to me about what that actually looked like for them. And as they have worked through that, I reached out to them just to see if they had any reflections, any thoughts. And Carrie and Noah sent me back an email that I thought was so good and had so many nuggets of wisdom that I just want to read it to you, so that you may begin to think through, what does it look like for you to incorporate Sabbath into your life? And if you know the Bennetts, or if you don't know them, they have a lot of stuff going on. And this was still of value to them. This is what it says. This is from Carrie and Noah. We've been working on incorporating Sabbath into our lives this entire year. Call it a New Year's resolution. It was difficult at first. I think the hardest part was hammering down what day we were going to aim for consistently. Because, as everyone else is too, we are busy. With Noah's school and my work schedule, it needed to be a weekend, but weekends are also when we felt like we could see friends and family and get stuff done around the house. Sabbath is amazing, And now we know how important and restorative it is. But starting out, it felt like a sacrifice. We usually aim for Sundays, though some weeks we have to move it around if Noah has to work or is on call shifts on Sundays. Over the year, we've learned the single most integral component of our Sabbath is to intentionally schedule it on our calendar as soon as Noah gets his work schedule for the next month. We put it on our shared calendar on our phones that we use to schedule all of our plans. We schedule it first so that we are moving other plans around the Sabbath and not trying to just squeeze Sabbath in around everything else. It feels really like a first fruits concept to me. When we are scheduling plans, if we have to go to the requested date and it's labeled a Sabbath day, it really helps me, Carrie, to avoid feeling obligated to say yes. We don't say no to everything on Sabbath, but we intentionally assess the request to determine if it feels like a restful activity or if it will feel draining. We aim to combine a combination of different activities on Sabbath: attending church or spending time in the Word, spending time together as a family, getting out into nature, playing board games, cooking together, or avoid cooking by eating snacks for the entirety of the day, limit social media, phone use, read, crafts, etc. We try to make it a day of no or very few plans so that we can do whatever we want with it. Sometimes it's hard to prepare completely for Sabbath, so we've implemented a to-do list to help us refocus on the restful day. If Noah or I find ourselves thinking too much about a work activity, we begin to make a list of things that we need to do later that week. Once it's written down, we find it's easier to separate our thoughts from it. It's a task for the future, Noah and Carrie, to take care of. We do find that we have more energy for the week and our motivation after taking a day of rest. It's also a wonderful day to recenter ourselves on God's truths and his promises. I personally find that it has helped me look forward to him at times when I step away during the week. So many nuggets of wisdom there, right? So many things that we can learn from their example of implementing Sabbath into their life. There's an intentionality behind doing it. It's scheduling it out, but it's scheduling a block of time to not schedule things in, which sounds so counterproductive and counterintuitive, but it's so important. Sabbath is not nearly as controversial. It doesn't rub us the wrong way as some of these other topics we've talked about, right? But it is equally as significant. Is equally as slow down and to rest, to realize the restlessness that we have in each one of us, to realize the finite nature of each one of us, to realize that we need to stand in resistance against what culture is telling us to do, what we are telling us to do. And instead, we need to find a rhythm in Sabbath so that we can come together and so we can make sure that we are focused on God. Stop and we can rest, we can delight, and we can contemplate rather than just keep going. One of the ways that we do some of those aspects of stopping and resting and delighting and contemplating is through communion. It's something that we celebrate here each week at the Foundry. There's tables in the front of the room, in the back of the room. And it's a way for us to stop and to remember the sacrifice that Christ has made for us. To find rest in that. That we don't have to be perfect, that we don't have to have it all together, because he's made this sacrifice for us. To delight in that, loved us and lavished his love on us. And to contemplate what we're going to do about that. To contemplate how that's going to change and affect our lives. So here in just a moment, what we're going to do is partake in communion. We're going to go to the stations, we're going to grab communion, and as we've done each week in this series, we're going to come back together. I'll pray and we'll take it in unison together. And after we do that, on the screen, there's going to be just those 4 words. And I want you to just take a minute and a half or 2 minutes. And before we jump back into singing songs together, I want you to think practically what it looks like for you to find stop and rest and delight and contemplate in your life. To ask the question, God, what do you want from me in these 4 things? And then to think through, okay, well, what am I going to do now that I have that? So let me pray, and then we will partake in communion together. God, I thank you for who you are. I thank you for your Son. I thank you that you bring us rest, that you bring us grace, that you help us stop from the hurry of life, that we can delight in who you are, that we can find hope and care in you, and that we have the space to contemplate on who you are and what you call us to be. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. In our hands, we hold a cracker. And this cracker represents his body, which was broken for us. Jesus calls us to take this in remembrance of him. And in our hands, we hold a cup of juice that represents his blood that was poured out for us. Jesus asked us to drink this in remembrance of him. Take a moment as David plays some soft music and think through these words. Ask God what he wants you to do with these things and how you can find him in these things. And then ask yourself, what am I going to do to live this out? And then we'll join together in worship in just a minute.
Your
You can take a seat for just a moment. As we conclude our time together today, there's just a few things upcoming here at the Foundry I want to let you know a little bit about. One is an opportunity for you to help a parent replace stress with rest this holiday season. That's through the Christmas store. The Christmas store is a way for us to care for parents and to care for kids in need in our city, where we help them be the heroes this holiday. We help them not be stressed about what they have to get their kids, but instead find rest and security in the fact that they are able to provide for their kids. We obviously need more and more toys for that. Our goal is about 3,000 toys this year, so please keep giving those new toys. But also what we need to pull this off is volunteers. We need people to come on the Saturdays of December 7th and December 14th to help parents find the toys that they need for their kids, to help them find that rest. And if you are a person as well that you don't work the typical 9 to 5 schedule, we always need help as well on the Fridays before to help get everything over there and set up. And so if you want to help provide that rest for parents this holiday season, the folks at the Connection Hubs in the back of the room on the top of the stairwell would love to talk to you about what that looks like and how you can get plugged in, how you can sign up there. The second thing to know for guys, this is a teaser for something that we're going to talk a lot about in the upcoming weeks, and that is Manuary 2020. Which is crazy, it's 2020. It's going to be the weekend of January 24th and 25th. Basically what it is our guys' getaway. We get away for about a 24-hour period just over the Pennsylvania line to be refreshed, to rest, to wrestle a little bit with Scripture, to be challenged in that way, but also to slow down from the pace of life. It's a really practical way of living out some of the stuff we've talked about today. So the signups are live for that today. So if you go to our website, you can find information about Manuary. I'm not going to continue to labor on that today, but we will be talking more and more in the upcoming weeks about that. There was a story that was brought to my attention a few weeks ago that I thought I would share with you guys as well. Each and every Sunday, as I mentioned earlier, we have a group of people that come and they provide breakfast for some people who have a little less fortunate. And there was a man that came in a couple weeks ago that as he was leaving, he left just a pile of coins as a way of just saying thank you for providing a breakfast. As a way of saying, hey, I don't have much, but I want to continue to invest in the mission of what this church is, continue to invest in this city, and so I'm going to give what I have. Really paralleling the widow with 2 coins that we find in the gospel accounts. Each week when we talk about generosity, that's what we're talking about, is coming together collectively, giving what we can, giving what we have, sometimes intentionally making a sacrifice so that we can continue to live out in this city what God has called us to do as a church. To continue to make an investment, not just in this neighborhood, but neighborhoods all across the city. So that people can come to know him, so that lives can be restored through him. So if you want to do that today, there's 3 different ways that you can do that. You can do that on the My Church app. You can do that at foundrybaltimore.com, or you can do that in the wooden boxes in the back of the room. So as we close our time together today, I want to read Psalm 23 over us as a benediction to remind ourselves of the rest that we find in God. And may this be our prayer as we go throughout this week. So would you just pray this with me? Lord, you are our shepherd. We lack in nothing.